Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Naruto was Shinobi Ashikabi. If you guys enjoyed this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. Before we get into it though, check out Bilibili Comics. Bilibili Comics is the official trusted place to read hit exclusive series from top creators. Bilibili Comics is a great online webtoons and webcomics reader among all reading apps. Enjoy the best new comics, manhwa, and exclusive webtoons on Bilibili Comics. Download the app now and jump right into it. The link is in the description. Now let's start this video. Kusano was exactly how Naruto had left her, crouched low on the ground, her hands covering her eyes as she shook in fear. As the sound of the blonde's footsteps approached her, the little girl shrank in on herself, as if hoping that by making herself as small as possible, she would be overlooked. Naruto hesitated in his next step as he felt his heart lurch oddly in his chest. It was an unusual feeling, a combination of emotions he had only been starting to feel again within the past few days. Since meeting Misubi, in fact. Anger was the foremost of those emotions, anger at the Sekirei who had dared to make this little girl so fearful. Sadness that Kusano felt so fearful in the first place. And regret that he had been unable to find her before number 43 had, and thus forced her to experience fear at such a young age. Each and every single emotion he felt was like a bullet being shot into his chest. They came without warning, and Naruto found himself wondering if perhaps he shouldn't have saved this girl to save him from feeling so many strong emotions. Of course, then he felt guilty for even thinking that. It was most fortunate that Naruto had met Misubi now though. Had he gone into this situation without having already started experience all of these different emotions, they may have actually been capable of rendering him incapable of actually doing anything to help the girl. It wouldn't have been good if his emotions had made him unable to properly fight. That girl, for all her inexperience, had been powerful, at least as far as raw talent went. So even though Naruto's heart clenched at the sight of this little girl cowering before him, he managed to keep himself from doing anything more than hesitating on a single step before he was next to her. "You can open your eyes now, Ku-chan," Naruto said in what he hoped was a gentle tone. He was still running on adrenaline at the moment, so it was hard to tell. "Everything's alright now." Slowly at first, as though afraid the sound of his voice was nothing more than a dream, Kusano peeled her tiny hands away from her face. The skin around her eyelids had wrinkles in them from the pressure she was using to keep them shut, but those wrinkles began to slowly disappear as her eyes relaxed. Her eyelids fluttered open soon after, revealing large bright green eyes. She blinked several times before they settled on Naruto and promptly widened. "Oni-chan?" she asked hesitantly, almost afraid to believe what she was seeing. Her eyes darted around the clearing in search of the Sekirei who had attacked her, only to find that there was no one there. It was just her and Naruto now in the clearing. Number 43 was hidden several meters away behind a large tree. When she found out that they were now alone, her eyes once more settled on the blonde, and tears of mixed relief and joy began streaming from them. "Oni-chan," she cried out as she stood up and rushed towards him, her arms outstretched in what was obviously an attempt to hug him. Naruto knelt down and easily scooped the girl up into his arms. She was light, almost too light, he noted. How long had it been since she had eaten? As the little girl's arms clung tightly around his neck while she balled into his shoulder, Naruto found himself forgoing his own analysis of the girl in his arms, in favor of simply giving the child comfort. "It's okay," he shushed her, his voice surprisingly soft. Naruto felt himself being flooded by emotions and memories, the scene bringing a sense of nostalgia that he had not felt in so long. He absently wondered how long it had been since he thought of that moment, but the recollection was brief, nothing more than a flicker in his conscience before it was gone, and all that was left once again was himself, and the girl crying in his arms. "Everything's going to be okay now. I'll protect you." His words caused the green girl to clutch onto him tighter, almost as if she were afraid he would disappear, then her body went inexplicably limp. Naruto felt a moment of fear as he checked the girl over. Had she been injured during his fight with number 43? Had the stress from this entire situation caused her to pass out? A million concerns and worries passed through his head, only to be put to rest when he saw the girl had simply fallen to exhaustion. She would find once she got some rest and a good meal. "Don't worry about a thing, Ku," Naruto said, more to himself than anybody else. "I'll protect you now." Without a passing glance at his surroundings, the blonde turned and was about to begin making his way back towards the entrance to the arboretum, when the sound of voices reached his ears. "Where the hell is that kid?" The first voice he heard was male, and gruff. Naruto deduced easily enough that the Ashikabi known as Sayo was the one speaking. "How should I know?" "Female, definitely one of the twins. Takari, the twin that was more easily agitated and much quicker to jump to violence. Did you see how fast he ran?" "Hibiki," Naruto judged from the mild way she spoke. "Of course we saw it. We all saw it. Damn it, it was just like that bastard we met a few days ago." Naruto grimaced a bit as he listened to the conversation. It seemed that his emotions had caused him to once more overreact in a way that revealed more than he had wanted to. The blonde was really going to have to work on this. Being so unused to dealing with emotions were making it impossible for him to make informed, intelligent, and pragmatic decisions. If this kept being an issue, there was no telling what kind of mistakes Naruto might cause, and what those mistakes would end up costing him. What I want to know is how he managed to run that fast. I mean, he's human, isn't he? That one was definitely Hamura. They were closer now. Naruto could see them entering the clearing, their figures getting more distinct and detailed with each passing second. For a moment he thought about putting his mask back on, but figured the point would be moot. The Lightning Twins had already seen him once, and they had no doubt told their Ashikabi about the bastard they had met a few days ago, and Hamura, well, if he was who Naruto thought he was, then it would only be a matter of time before he put 2 and 2 together and got 4. Best to just bite the bullet now than drag it out later. It wasn't long before the 4 others entered the clearing completely. It wasn't long after that all 4 eyes turned to look at Naruto, as he held a sleeping Kusano against him. Hamura's eyes narrowed as he looked at the blonde. Naruto noted that there was no surprise in his eyes, as if he had already figured out who had been hidden behind the mask, and now had his suspicions confirmed. Seo was observing both Naruto and the clearing they had found him in. Hibiki and Hikari blinked. Hikari shouted as she pointed at the blonde with a quivering finger. "It's you. You're the bastard who kicked me and Hibiki the other day." "Nice to see you again as well," Naruto replied dryly. He walked towards them with slow, methodical steps, and took in some amusement when he saw both Hikari and Hibiki tense. Standing behind them, Hamura's body twitched as well, though Naruto had a hard time interpreting the gesture, since it didn't seem like he was tensing, in order to possibly defend himself against a hostile force like the twins. Seo on the other hand didn't seem bothered at all. In fact, compared to the 3 Sekirei he looked positively fine. "Curious. Yo?" The other Ashikabi greeted in that same lazy tone he had used during their first meeting. "That was some pretty impressive running you did back there. You some kind of track star or something." It was a small probe for information, and not a very subtle one in Naruto's books. Of course, he had to deal with people like Hibiki and Inoichi who were masters of interrogation, so comparing a civilian, especially one in this day and age, to his idea of good interrogation techniques, was like comparing Manaka's crazy to Tobi's insanity. It just wasn't fair to the noob. "Or something," Naruto replied to the man's inquiry with a mysterious smile. There was no way this man would get any more out of him than what he already saw, and what Naruto already planned on revealing. He had already given away far more about his abilities than he had wanted to, and just by having these people in the clearing, he was giving even more away. Once again, there unfortunately wasn't much he could do about that. For now at least, Naruto would have to deal with these 4 and answer their questions in a way that both satisfied their curiosity, and kept him from revealing too many of his secrets. Rather than look put out, Seo simply laughed. "Well, whatever the case is, you sure managed to shock the hell out my girls here," he said. Grabbing the twins from behind, he slung his arm over their shoulders, his hands reaching around, and beginning to grope their breasts. Naruto's right eye gained a slight tick at the blatant display of sexual harassment in front of him. He was a man, and being one who has lived for thousands upon thousands of years, he knew more about sex than anyone else alive. Hell, he knew things about sex that had long since lain forgotten by the rest of humanity. So he didn't necessarily care that this guy was groping his Sekirei, not at all. But couldn't he at least do it in the privacy of his own home? Seriously, even when Naruto was seducing a girl to sleep with he wouldn't be so blatantly sexual, until after he had gotten her to his apartment. The girls didn't seem to like it either, Hikari in particular. "Damn it, Seo," she growled, her face an angry shade of red as she squirmed under his grip. Being the twin with the much larger breasts, the scruffy-looking Ashikabi seemed to be focusing most of his attention on her. "Stop that." "Ah," Hibiki chimed in, her face just as red as her sister's, though judging from her expression, it had less to do with rage, and more to do with embarrassment. "Seo, not here," she hissed out in a stuttering voice. Seo did not stop, and the pair soon grew so outraged by his increasingly bold movements, that the twins turned as one and electrocuted him with a blast of lightning. Naruto watched the entire display mostly impassively. However, there was a small part of him that couldn't help but smile slightly at the sight. It wasn't the thought of Seo getting his just desserts that caused the smile, but the memories he had of another pair of people who had been like that sprang to mind. It had always been amusing to see the antics of Sakura and Rock Lee when they were together, Lee with his antics of youth and Sakura with her fierce temper and violent fists. The two had been a lot like Seo and Hikari before. "Stop thinking about them, Naruto." Gritting his teeth so hard they began to grind into a fine powder before reforming again, the blonde made a concerted effort towards ridding himself of the painful memories. "Thinking about them is useless. They're dead. You need to move on." Only he couldn't move on, he had never been able to move past his past. It was always there, lurking in the corner of his mind and reminding him of better times. Bittersweet memories that were tinged with despair. Never again would he be able to reclaim those times. Even if he tried to recapture the old days, it would only be a passing moment, a small drop in the ocean that was his life. Those days were gone forever, and he was. Are you alright? Naruto jerked back, startled. Blinking several times to clear the blurriness from his vision, the blonde saw that Sayo was staring at him with an unusual look, a cross between curious and possibly concerned. I'm fine, Naruto said, shaking his head once and firmly ridding himself of any lingering memories. It wouldn't do to lose himself now, not when he had to deal with these four in a way that allowed him to keep his secrets. Sayo looked at him for a moment, studying him in what could pass for idle curiosity before, with a shrug, deciding not to pry further. Now standing at his side and no longer being harassed by their Ashikabi, Hikari and Hibiki were also looking at him, though they still looked wary. Hamura also looked wary, but in a much different way than the twins. Once again, Naruto found it hard to judge what the fire user was thinking. Maybe it was the mask. I see you haven't winged her yet, Sayo said, bringing the blonde's attention back to him. The man was looking at Kusano, more specifically her back where there was a distinct lack of crest. She's had a hard day, Naruto replied softly. Before anyone even thinks of something like that, Ku-chan needs some food, some rest, and a good bath. As for what happens after that, well, here the blonde shrugged. That will be up to her. Ha, well you're not going to get any complaints from me, Sayo commented as he idly scratched his chin. He was still studying Naruto, but it was a lot less critical and with more acceptance than their first meeting. You know, I wasn't so sure about you when we first met, but you're alright in my books. Thanks, I guess, Naruto said, being careful not to disturb the sleeping girl in his arms as he once again shrugged. Well, it was nice that the guy was no longer suspicious of him. Naruto really couldn't care less what Sayo thought of him. Ashikabi or not, Sayo was still just a human, and while he might be an alright guy, Naruto was not sure if they would ever meet again after this, and if they did, they could very well be enemies. Sayo seemed to find his nonchalance amusing. He snorted out a laugh that seemed to emphasize this fact. Then he blinked. Wasn't there supposed to be another Sekirei around here somewhere? He asked as if just now remembering that there was another Sekirei within the Arboretum. The man looked around at the area, now taking careful note of the damage that had been done to the surrounding trees. It certainly looks like someone else was here. He chuckled and grinned ruefully. Think they got scared and ran away. Naruto had already known this moment was coming. Even as he had conversed with Sayo by dodging the man's light attempt at an interrogation, the Eternal Shinobi had been putting together a list of responses and information that he would be giving to the group before him. No, Naruto answered. She's still here. With his free hand he pointed towards the small line of trees where the body of number 43 was still laying behind. She's right over there. Without wasting a single second, Hamura rushed over to where Naruto had pointed, his eyes wide. Just as he was passing the line of trees he skidded to a halt, no doubt having just found the body. The fire user's eyes went from the body, then to Naruto, then to Kusano, before going back to the body. After several seconds of doing this with his eyes widening with every passing second, he seemed to come to some kind of conclusion as to what happened here. He defeated a Sekirei, he breathed, his voice laced with shock and something else, something Naruto was having trouble identifying. The fire user placed a hand against the nearest tree and leaned onto it, grimacing as he once again rubbed his chest. Defeated a Sekirei. Hikari snorted incredulously, before she too ran over to where Hamura was. What the hell are you talking about, Hamura? Yeah, the guy's freaky fast, but there's no way a mere human could. She got stuck on that last word before trailing off completely as her eyes landed on the body of the Sekirei Naruto had defeated. Sayo leaned over to look Hikari's shoulder to get a look at the fallen wind user. When he saw the woman still lying on her side with a bloody nose and several cuts, scrapes, and bruises along her body, he let loose a whistle, then turned back to Naruto. I thought it looked like some kind of battle had gone on here, he said, looking at Naruto with a new gaze, this one calculating. So tell me, just how did you manage to beat a Sekirei? She was inexperienced, Naruto replied in a steady voice. She didn't know how to fight properly, all of her movements were telegraphed to the point where her superior speed and strength meant very little in the grand scheme of things. And she seemed to only have a passing idea on just how to effectively use that side of hers. The blonde ticked off each point he made on his finger as he spoke, at least until he mentioned the scythe, at which point he pointed at the scythe still buried in the ground. The only ability she had that I needed to watch out for was this strange wind blade that she could launch from her scythe. He shrugged, and finally concluded his point-by-point estimation of his enemy's skills. But like I said, she was so bad at telegraphing her moves that dodging her wind blades were easy. Naruto gave himself a mental pat at the back at his lecture on how he had defeated the girl. It was concise, to the point, and the only information it would give anyone about him was that he was apparently very good at fighting. The answer was very open-ended, leaving numerous theories from Naruto being a former soldier in the military, to some kind of battle junkie or even an attacker. In short, all he did was let them know that he understood the mechanics behind combat better than most people did. It probably helped that everything he had said was completely true. His lecture on number 43's battle prowess was met with various reactions. Hikari and Hibiki were staring at him with matching stupid expressions, blinking as they tried to put his words into some form they could understand. Hamura, on the other hand, had narrowed his eyes and was giving Naruto a contemplative look, even as his hand once more moved up to furiously rub his chest. Seo's reaction was probably the most amusing, as well as the most telling. He simply laughed. "You some kind of battle nut or something?" he asked once he got through with his 15 seconds of giggles. Naruto just gave the man a mysterious smile. Or something. After some more questioning, all of which Naruto was able to answer without really giving anything about himself away, a fact which seemed to bother Hamura immensely and amuse Seo, Naruto and the motley group that had, for the moment, allied themselves with each other, made their way out of the arboretum. With Kusano sleeping in Naruto's arms, it was a slow-going process. He could have moved faster. The blonde was positive he could tree-hop his way out without disturbing the green girl's sleep. But for the sake of keeping appearances and keeping the others, especially Hamura, from getting suspicious, he stayed with them. When they arrived at the gates, it was to see the familiar scene of destruction that had been unleashed by number 43, who Hamura had told him was named Yomi. Among the wreckage and bodies stood Naruto's Sakurai. Akitsu looked as impeccable as usual, neither a cut on her clothes, nor a ruffled hair out of place, as she stood where she was impassively. Yusubi, on the other hand, looked decidedly less fortunate. Most of her top was gone, leaving only the bottom part of her shirt and some of the left sleeve, with the two pieces being held together by a few threads. Her skirt was still there, though it too had several cuts on it, exposing much of her white panties to the world. Despite the fact that the girl looked like her clothing had been put through a blender, she seemed to be in an even better mood than before. Naruto assumed it was because she had finally gotten into a fight. The blonde also took notice of the fact that the three Sakurai they had been fighting were gone. Akitsu-chan, Misubi-chan, Naruto called out, once more using the chan suffix, now that the mission was complete. Both of his girls turned around to look at him, and Misubi's already brilliant smile lit up until it was bright enough to compete with the sun, before she began rushing towards him. Akitsu did not say anything, she just blurred over to him with a quickness that was startling. He hadn't realized she could move so fast. "Are you okay, Ashikabi-sama?" she asked, her tone just as bland as always, though Naruto could detect her worry, both within her voice and transmitting over the bond. "Ah, Naruto-sama." Misubi suddenly appeared directly on his left, her excitement even more evident as she bounced on the balls of her feet. One hand was being held to her chest, covering it, a fact which Naruto was thankful for as he felt Seo's eyes on his girl's chest. For some reason, that really pissed him off. "Look," Misubi cheered, pumping her free hand into the air. "I protected my modesty." "That's good, Misubi-chan," he told her. To be honest, he was actually kind of surprised she had even remembered their conversation about how he didn't want other males to see her like that. At the same time, it was also strangely heartwarming that she would remember that and take appropriate actions. At least as appropriate in action as current circumstances would allow. "And I'm fine, Akitsu-chan. Thank you." Akitsu's cheeks flushed slightly red when he favored her with a smile, however, that blush left when her eyes gazed upon his cheek. More specifically, the trail of blood leaking from it. "You're hurt," she murmured. "Ah, don't worry about it," Naruto said, wiping the blood off his cheek with his free hand to reveal unmarred skin. "See? Not even a scratch." Despite his reassurances, Akitsu continued to stare at the place where the blood had been. Naruto coughed, feeling awkward, and turned his gaze towards the area around him to see if he could see anything that might hint at what happened. "So these two are your Sakurai?" Seo asked, and Naruto, grateful for the distraction, turned to him and nodded. The scruffy Ashikabi gave a lecherous grin as he eyed his two girls. "Man, these really are impressive girls. I mean, look at their chests." His hands began to gesticulate in front of his chest in an exaggerated circular manner, as he waggled his eyebrows at the blonde. Naruto's lips thinned into a displeased line as a sudden yet intense urge to rip the man's arms off and shove them up his ass overcame him. Fortunately for both him and Seo, before Naruto could possibly react on this near-overwhelming feeling, the man received punishment from his Sakurai via a bolt of lightning. Naruto watched his Sakurai twitched and spasmed as he knew how many volts of electricity ran through him, the need for sudden violence dissipating, as he watched the man getting shocked in satisfaction. When the man was left as nothing more than a blackened, twitching figure on the ground, the eternal shinobi turned his attention back to the surrounding area. "So what happened to those other three Sakurai you two fought?" he asked his two Sakurai as his eyes took into the new holes in the ground that Naruto figured must have been Akitsu's ice shards. He also noticed a couple of craters that dotted the street, and could only conclude they were from Yusubi. "Ah, surprisingly enough, it was Akitsu who spoke first. They got away," she admitted. Naruto turned his head to look at her again, hoping against hope that she would elaborate. When it became clear that she wouldn't, he turned to look at Misubi. "So how did you do?" he asked, figuring if he had to ask this girl anything it should be about her own personal experience with combat. He doubted she would be able to give him a detailed report of what had happened. It looked like he would simply need to make do with physical evidence. I was completely outclassed. The excitable Sakurai supplied cheerfully. Naruto nodded as his eyes continued to search the area of destruction, right before his brain fully processed her words, and then snapped over to her direction. What do you mean you were outclassed? Surprisingly, the first thing that shocked Naruto was that Musubi seemed to actually know what outclassed meant. He honestly hadn't thought she would understand big words. After his initial shock of the girl using a more complicated word correctly, he felt a sense of worry for the girl overtaken. For some reason, even though it was clear that Musubi was perfectly fine seeing how she was right there in front of him, her words left him with an empty feeling inside. How could he have been so careless? What if she had been injured? These thoughts and many more self-recriminations entered his mind at a rate that left him reeling. As it was, only the fact that he had already dealt with too much today kept his face from giving away anything more than a grimace. Well, I was doing pretty well at first, Musubi admitted, the index finger of her left hand pressing against her lip as she looked up at the starry night sky. But then that girl with the strings managed to tie me up. You were tied up. That was from Seo, who was back on his feet as if the previous shocking experience had never happened. Given that the twins had shocked him so effortlessly and carelessly, Naruto assumed that the event must be a regular occurrence. Now that I would have liked to see. And like a prophetic vision coming true, Seo was once again zapped by his two Sakurai. Naruto ignored him in favor of listening to Musubi continue talking, as if there had been no interruption. That girl almost got me then, but luckily Akitsu was here to rescue me. The fist fighter gushed, stars appearing in her eyes as she looked at Akitsu with her fists under her chin. She was so strong, even when fighting two people she managed to rescue me. Well, I'm glad you two are alright, Naruto said at last. He finished surveying the scene, taking the time to observe the damage. He had spotted all of the holes that Akitsu had made with her ice shards, including a few areas where large bodies of water were located, possibly from a larger technique the Snow Woman had used. He also saw several craters. Most he noted were small, circular craters similar to what he would see if he looked at the moon. Those he assumed were from Musubi. However, there were other craters, smaller ones that looked more like spiderweb cracks that Naruto determined were from the whip user. He also made sure to pay special attention to the skid marks he had seen several meters away that had not been there when he went into the arboretum. Obviously the Sakurai's Ashikabi had come for them at some point, perhaps when he had somehow realized Yomi had been defeated. Which once more brought up his questions about the bond between Sakurai and Ashikabi. Just what was the bond shared between the Sakurai and their Ashikabi? Were all bonds the same? What was it about Sakurai that allowed them to bond in the first place? There were so many things he wanted to know. Answers that he wanted to get. He disliked not having information when he found himself stuck in any kind of situation. The fact that this was something so off the charts that even he, a man who had lived for thousands of years, was having trouble understanding it, just made the whole fiasco that much more frustrating. And as much as it sucked, he knew that right now he would not be getting any of those answers. With a sigh, Naruto shifted his attention away from his internal issues and frustrations, and turned his focus back towards his Sakurai. Well, our mission to rescue Kru-chan was a success, he said, finally bringing his Sakurai's attention to the little girl sleeping in his arms. Aw. Musubi squealed, her hands clenched in a prayer sign under her chin. She's so cute. SHH, Naruto hushed the girl when he felt Kusano shift against his shoulder and mumble something that sounded vaguely like Wani-chan under her breath. Try not to be so loud, she's had a trying time, and I don't want to wake her. Ah, right, Musubi said, her voice now a whisper. Sorry, her apology was followed by the now customary knuckling of her head, as she stuck her tongue out. Ah, Akitsu murmured. I'll be quiet, she finished, and Naruto stared at the ice user. She was already too quiet in his opinion. Thanks you too, he decided on saying, then turned his attention back to his four allies of circumstance. Specifically, Naruto eyed Hamura. He was now sure that the fire user was, in fact, Kagari, the playboy working at a host club who lived with him at Maison Izumo. This didn't really surprise him as much as it might have, though he would admit to having thought that all Sakurai were female before now. However, this knowledge now presented a small issue. Well, not so much of an issue as a set of choices he could make. If Hamura really was Kagari, then Naruto had three choices. He could reveal Hamura's identity right here, and now, he could reveal Hamura's identity later on when he had the time to speak with the man alone, or he could pretend he didn't know Hamura's identity. There was, of course, the chance that Naruto was wrong, but that chance was so negligible that the very thought almost made him laugh. The first choice wasn't one that Naruto felt would do any good. Not only would it likely make Hamura angry, but it might also put him on the fire user's shit list. The last thing he needed was to have the man launching fire at him whenever they met. The second option had potential. If Naruto got Hamura alone and confirmed his identity, the man may still get angry, but he wouldn't be able to really do anything in public without giving himself away. Naruto could use the knowledge that he knew the man's identity, or alias. He didn't know whether the fire user's real name was Hamiura or Kagari after all, and hang that knowledge over him for blackmail material later. It was definitely the choice with the most potential benefit for himself, and it wasn't like Hamiura could actually kill him. The male Sakurai was several thousand years too soon to even make an attempt on his life. However, the thought of blackmailing someone he didn't necessarily need to left a sour taste in his mouth. The blonde would admit, if only to himself, that he had blackmailed many people in his life. Even now he had dirt on nearly all of the politicians in the United States, the royal family in England, and various other national figures around the world. Along with a few people who worked in various departments that allowed him to keep his anonymity, such as people who created identification cards, passports, data entry onto the internet, and a number of other departments that were closely regulated by the various governments of the world. This wasn't done with any malicious intent, but necessity. With the changing of the times and the new innovations in technology, Naruto could no longer just travel from one country to another as he pleased. You needed passports to travel between countries. You needed identification, social security numbers and birth certificates to work, drive, and get a place to live. And with the invention of the internet, Naruto needed someone on the inside who could erase any and all information that may have cropped up about him throughout various times in the world. It had been easier to just leave things as they were back during the age before the internet. Even as recently as the 1950s when the computer was first invented, Naruto would not have had any problems moving around. He tended to mind his own business for the most part, and so the news would have never been able to report him, and even if someone had gotten a picture of him, they would not have made anything of it. Now though, things were different. Naruto couldn't remain hidden without aid, and he couldn't get aid without revealing himself, unless he had so much dirt on the people who could aid him, that they could not even think of asking questions, for fear of what might happen if he released the dirt he had on them to the police, or the public, or even important officials through various channels. Much like Jiraiya's spy network, Naruto had created a vast network of various people he had blackmailed into unknowingly helping him keep his existence a secret. Even then, this might just be a temporary solution. With even more technological inventions like the many satellites that now orbited the Earth and could take incredibly accurate images of people from space, the possibility of him being discovered ran even higher. None of that was relevant to the now, however, and as Naruto thought about what he should do about Hamiura, he quickly made his decision. He would keep the secret of the fire user's identity to himself for now, and only reveal it if it became a necessity. I guess this is where we part ways, Naruto informed the four who were not his Sakurai. Akitsu-chan, Musubi-chan and I will be heading back to our boarding house. Yeah, I think it's about time the girls and me head on home as well, Seo said, stretching out his arms as he let loose a white-mouthed yawn. He then wrapped one arm each around the twins' shoulders. This time he did not grope them, and the three began turning towards where Naruto assumed they lived. The man turned his head to look back as he began walking away, and gave the blonde a lazy grin. We'll be seeing ya. Bye. Musubi shouted as she waved at the trio, and Naruto was somehow not surprised that she had not reacted to the lightning twins. It was apparent that there was far too much going on at the moment for the girl to focus on anything more than the basics right now. When the twins and their Ashikabi were out of sight, Naruto turned to look at Hamiura, who he noted was now studying him. So what about you? The blonde asked. Do you have a place to live or? He trailed off, leaving the question hanging on purpose. He wanted Hamiura to assume he did not know of his identity, and to do that he needed to sell the idea that he did not know that Hamiura lived at Maison Izumo. I've got a place to live, thanks, Hamiura replied, his voice a mix between snappish, sarcastic, and grateful. An odd combination indeed. Hey, are you alright, Hamiura? Asked Naruto. Now that they were no longer in such an intense situation, he was beginning to take note of the fact that the fire user wasn't looking too good. There were bags under his eyes, he was breathing heavily despite not having done much fighting, and what little of his face Naruto could make out was flushed. In fact, if he didn't know any better the blonde would say the man was sick. I'm fine, Hamiura grimaced, his hand once more scratching his chest. Naruto was beginning to wonder if that was some kind of nervous tic. Sorry for snapping at you, he murmured in apology. It's been a long day. I'm with you there, Naruto agreed with a nod. And on that note, I think it's time we take our leave. Perhaps we'll see each other again sometime. Perhaps, Hamiura agreed, and if the man's grimace was any indication, he was not looking forward to such a reunion. It had been quite the day, Naruto admitted to himself. It was now late at night, or early in the morning, depending on who you asked, and more had happened to him in the last several hours than anything he had experienced within the past several hundred years. From yesterday morning when he had awoken from that dream of Kusano, Naruto's day had been filled with more action than he had ever expected to find these days. His preliminary scan of the Arboretum, his violent meeting with Hamiura, teaming up with Hamiura, the confrontation between his Sakurai and three other Sakurai at the gate, his other violent meeting with Seo and the Lightning Twins, and his fight with Yomi. It had all happened so quickly that Naruto could barely keep his head on straight. It had been a long day, and all Naruto really wanted to do right now was get some sleep. Unfortunately for him, it was not quite the end of the day for Naruto. As soon as he stepped in through the door, carrying Kusano on his back, the first person he ran into was Mia. Said woman only took one glance at him before an unreadable expression crossed her face. Naruto didn't quite know what to make of it, and didn't have time to contemplate the look before she spun on her heels, walking into another room before returning again, this time with her katana in hand. Mia-chan. What are you doing with that? Asked Naruto, only to be ignored as Mia quickly withdrew the weapon and pointed it at the blonde's throat. Musubi gasped, shocked that their nice landlady was pointing a weapon at Naruto. Meanwhile, Akitsu quickly stepped forward to launch an attack at the woman threatening her Ashikabi, only to be stopped by said blonde raising a hand in front of her. Ashikabi-sama. Akitsu said questioningly, her mind trying to decipher the reason her Ashikabi wasn't allowing her to defend him. Unfortunately, she couldn't come up with anything. There was a clear threat to his safety present, and he wasn't letting her do anything. It was quite clear that she was struggling with wanting to face the current threat to his safety, with the fact that her Ashikabi was ordering her not to do anything. Fortunately, the order won out. He was her Ashikabi, and as his Sekirei it was her job to follow his orders to the letter. Relax, Akitsu-chan, Naruto said in a soothing voice. She did just that, her body unable to do anything but soften its posture at the sound of his soft tone, almost against her will. The confidence in the blonde's voice was more than enough to reassure the ice user that he had things well in hand. Seeing her relax, the blonde eyed the sword pointed at his throat and the eyes of the woman holding it. She looked angry, an expression he had yet to see on the kind woman. So far he had seen her amused, happy, curious, and mildly disgruntled. He has seen her smile, frown, giggle, pout, and even saw her awesome Hanyu mask. This look was new, her eyes were narrowed, and her lips were set in a thin line that showed visible anger and disapproval at his actions, whatever action it was that he had committed to upset her. He was still trying to figure out just what he had done to earn a sword being pointed at his throat. His mind replayed the events of the past few days, trying to find if he had offended the woman at some point. After a split second reviewing and replaying all of the memories of him interacting with Mia, he found nothing, making him even more confused. Just what had he done to earn the woman's ire? I take it there's a reason you're pointing a sword at me, Mia-chan. A very good reason, Mia said sternly. Her voice was rather cold, almost bone-chilling. It was one that he had heard in only a few people in his life. Senjutsu Tsunade when she was pissed off at Jiraiya for peeping. Haruno Sakura when she thought Naruto was doing something perverted. Kazuhana Koyuki when she had been dealing with a group of traitors after her throne, and when he did something she considered stupid. Yuhi Kurenai when a male was ogling her. This led to many genjutsu that she'll forever remain in anonymity for the blonde's peace of mind. And Mitarashi Onko when someone knocked over and/or insulted her dango. Onko was just weird like that. While he had known quite a few women capable of pulling off the "you have a lot of explaining to do before I gut you like a fish and hang you by your balls" tone of voice, seeing it in this day and age was surprising. He had long since thought the ability to create such a frightening tone and look had been lost. Apparently it hadn't. The two Sekireis on either side of Naruto shivered at the voice, and both of them moved a little closer to him for comfort. It was clear that neither of them were used to that look or that tone. Not that he could blame them for being frightened. The only reason Naruto himself didn't was because he had dealt with worse in his lifetime. This woman, while obviously very powerful, couldn't hold a candle to some of the horrors he had seen in his life. And it wasn't like she could actually kill him. He was pretty sure that no one could kill him nowadays, though he hadn't been challenged seriously enough to actually get injured in nearly 2,000 years, so he couldn't say for sure. I thought you were better than to stoop so low as to kidnap someone, Naruto-san. But it appears I was mistaken. You do know that kidnapping is one of the highest offenses that can be committed. And that committing said act results in the harshest of punishments. Don't you? Kidnapping? Naruto blinked several times. He tossed the word around a few times in his head, wondering what the hell Mia meant. He blinked, his eyes going from the sword to Kusano, then back to the sword. And suddenly his eyes gained a glint of understanding. You think I kidnapped Ku-chan? What else could this possibly be, if not a kidnapping? It was a rhetorical question, the tone in Mia's voice made that clear. But Naruto answered it anyways. How about? Gurgle. Naruto, Mia, and the other two Sekirei in the room blinked owlishly at the rumbling sound that echoed throughout the room. All four of them stopped what they were doing, halted their argument, and began to look around for the source of the sound, which reminded them of the roar of an angry predator. Gurgle. The sound came once again, and the four were able to track the noise to its source. For some reason Naruto found the sound to be very familiar, though for the life of him, he could not place where he had heard it before. Gurgle. So hungry. The little girl muttered, just loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear before her stomach rumbled again. As the girl's stomach growled for a third time, and the soft words that were issued from her mouth came to him, the blonde realized where he had heard that noise before. Musubi's stomach when she was hungry. He hoped to comment that Kusano did not have an appetite as large as the fist-type Sekirei's. She must not have eaten for a long time, being cooped up in the forest, Naruto mumbled, more to himself than anyone else. He turned to look at Miya and gave her a sheepish grin. So, it looks like Ku-chan's hungry. Would you mind making her something to eat? I promise to tell you everything then. Miya just blinked at him, her expression going from stern and angry to confused. I see, Miya said as she sipped a steaming cup of tea. After the incident in the hall, Naruto had convinced her that they would be better off moving their conversation into the dining room, where they could also fix up something to eat for Kusano. Miya was sitting at her usual place at the head of the table, while Naruto sat on her left-hand side, Akitsu on his right as she stared at him with her usual intensity, and Kusano sitting in between him and Misubi on his left. The only two people who were missing was Kagari, who Naruto assumed was either in his room or patrolling the streets, while doing his duty as the guardian of unwinged Sekirei, and Uzume, who he had no clue as to her whereabouts. Lavendra had just finished listening to Naruto's tale about how he and his Sekirei had rescued Kusano. The Eternal Shinobi had told her everything that had happened between his dream about Kusano and now. Well, almost everything. He had not mentioned that he had fought and defeated Yumi. He knew that the landlady was probably aware that he was different from most humans, but he doubted she would ever be able to figure out the extent of his differences, unless he outright told her. After all, how many people would believe that he was a several thousand-year-old immortal with immense power, that had been wandering the world since the age where all humans had powers similar to his own? He also left out the parts about Kusano and the others people Sekirei. This was done more out of respect for Miya than anything else. He was sure that the woman was aware of the Sekirei plan. It didn't make sense for her not to be, since she had been housing two Sekirei before he even came here. It was also clear that the lavender-haired beauty didn't want to get involved in the Sekirei plan for whatever reason, and Naruto wanted to respect her decision. He still wasn't even sure if he wanted to take part in the Sekirei plan. There was also the fact that the president of MBI had told him not to say anything, but Naruto was not really concerned about Minaka, finding out he had told someone else about the Sekirei plan. He honestly couldn't care less if he revealed the secret. But until he knew more about Minaka, MBI and the Sekirei plan as a whole, he didn't want to callously give information that might place his Sekirei in jeopardy. It simply wasn't in his nature to place people he had grown to care about in harm's way. And there it was again. That emotion, that desire to protect. If he didn't figure this out soon, he might just end up going insane. Miya tapped her chin as she took in the sight of the little girl stuffing her face. It was a drastic change from just moments ago. Before the food had been placed in front of her, Kusano had looked like she was dead on her feet. So this girl was responsible for creating the overgrowth of plants in the arboretum, she said, looking at the girl appraisingly before turning to eye Naruto. And you, Misubi-chan and Akitsu-chan went there to rescue her. Am I getting this right? That's the gist of it, Naruto agreed as he scratched the back of his head. Idly, he turned his attention to the girl of their discussion. Kusano was now busy scarfing down several bowls worth of food, in an attempt to make up for however long she had not eaten. It was almost incredible to see such a tiny child eating so much, especially one that wasn't an Akimichi. Then again, she was a Sekirei. Perhaps they all simply had higher than normal metabolisms, though he had not seen Akitsu eat nearly as much as Misubi. The snow woman still ate quite a bit. Though he just figured it was due to Misubi being a fist type, and thus being much more active and having a higher energy expenditure. It was just a theory, but he assumed that simple types used less energy, due to the generally limited amount of movement they make during combat, and the fact that they don't use their energy for anything other than battle. He had no clue how to prove this, however, he wasn't a scientist, just a young-looking immortal with too much damn time on his hands. Naruto's sweat dropped as Miya stared at him with a discernible expression on her face. She leaned over, so close her nose was nearly touching his as she looked into his eyes with frightening intensity. Naruto said nothing, however, letting the purple-haired beauty search for whatever it was she was looking for. She seemed to find it after a few seconds of staring, because only a moment had passed before she pulled away from him and smiled. I believe you. You do? Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow. He was, in all honesty, not surprised. He knew that Miya was aware of the Sekirei plan at least to some degree. Naruto had not said anything when it happened, but he had seen the way Miya had glanced at Kusano when they first arrived. The first place she had looked was the back of her neck. Still, if Miya wanted to play her games, then he would play along with her. If nothing else, it would be a nice change of pace to have someone with whom he could banter back and forth with. Misubi wasn't much of a conversationalist unless it came to combat and love. And, well, Akitsu was Akitsu. Enough said there. Of course, Miya's bright smile was rather radiant as she spoke, so unlike her scary smile where her Hanyu mask would appear around her person. He still wanted to ask her how she did that. I'm very good at telling when someone is lying to me, so I know that everything you've said is the truth. Well, that's good, Naruto said with a laugh. His left hand came up and went behind his head, scratching it as a sheepish grin crossed his face. For a second there I was afraid you were going to point your katana at me again, or even worse, actually use it on me to cut me into tiny pieces. Oh no, I wouldn't do that, Mia said with a bright smile. Her eyes closed as her lips curled into a wide smile that looked very beautiful on her face. The air around the lavenderette began to darken as a malicious aura appeared around her, making the beautiful smile seem more sinister. I would only cut you up if you deserved it. Ah, that's good to know, Naruto said with a swift drop. He wondered what it was with him and violent women. Why was it that he always found himself surrounded by that type of girl? Back then it was Sakura-chan, Tsunade-ba-chan, Anko-chan, Kurenai-chan and Yugao-chan that I had to worry about trying to beat me half to death and or genjutsu me. The blonde looked from Miya to Musubi to Akitsu inside. Now I've got these three, all of them powerful fighters in their own right. Well, at least none of them have actually tried beating the crap out of me yet. For some reason his mind conjured up an image of Akitsu, Miya and Musubi in the leather bondage clothing those lightning girls had been in. A blush formed on his face, but he quickly shook it off. Don't go there, Naruto, don't even think about it. He brought up both hands and smacked himself across the face several times, the pain helping his mind move out of the gutter and back into the real world. The last thing you need is Miya thinking you're some kind of pervert. Naruto blinked, his eyes opening to see Miya and Musubi staring at him strangely. Akitsu would have been included in this as well, but she was already staring at him. Are you okay, Uzumaki-kun? Yeah, I'm fine, Naruto replied, coughing into his hand to hide the slight blush that threatened to creep back onto his face. He was beginning to think he might need some kind of help, what with the way his emotions were bouncing all over the place, going from serious to perverted to embarrassed in seconds. Anyway, do you think you could let Ku-chan stay here with us? I don't see why not, Miya said. She looked up at the ceiling as a thought, before smiling. It's not like she has anywhere else to go, and since you're the one who rescued her, I doubt she'll want to leave you. So of course she can stay. Thank you very much. Naruto smiled as he began eating some of his own food, having disregarded it until after he finished his conversation with Miya. He was pleased that his landlady understood the new situation, and was willing to allow Kusano to stay with them. Not that he had expected her to do otherwise. If nothing else, Miya was a very kind and caring individual. Even if she hadn't understood the truth of how Kusano came to be in his care, he was sure she would have let the young Sekirei stay at Izumo Inn. As he began eating the delicious food, calamari in a spicy dipping sauce and pickled vegetables, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallways. Naruto turned his head just in time to see the door open to reveal Kagari. He looked like he was still getting dressed. His long-sleeved shirt still had several buttons that were undone, and a tie was hanging loosely from his neck. Likewise, he wasn't wearing his normal jacket, instead it was currently folded across his arm. All in all, he gave the picture of somebody who was in a rush. Well, that answered his question as to where he was. Naruto wondered if he had managed to get here before him and his girls, or if he had come in after they had arrived. The white-haired male's eyes took a quick second to glance at all of the occupants in the room. He grimaced a bit when his eyes landed on Naruto, much to Set Blonde's confusion and annoyance, before locking on the still-eating Kusano, and then going back to Miya. Miya, I'm going to be heading out, so you don't have to prepare anything for me, he told her as his hand came up to rub his chest. The man seemed to realize what he was doing at the last second, and with another grimace, pulled his hand away and began to finish getting dressed. Oh? Miya looked Kagari up and down as he finished getting dressed, buttoning up the last of his buttons, tightening and straightening his tie, and finally putting his jacket on. You're dressed up rather nicely today, more so than usual, she commented lightly, though Naruto could detect the worry in her voice. No doubt she had also noticed his habit of scratching his chest, and the looks he was giving Naruto. Is something going on? Nothing big really, Kagari replied in a conversational and smooth tone. Naruto figured he was modulating his voice in preparation for his job. It reminded him of the few times he had been ordered to seduce a woman of high station when he was a ninja. He would often change his voice into the smooth husky sound that the other man was using now. He had also done it when the loneliness became unbearable, and he decided to find a female companion for the night, but that was something he didn't like thinking about. Shaking his head, Naruto focused his attention on Kagari as the young man continued. Well, impressive that Kagari could do such a thing when under such obvious duress was impressive. It wasn't any of his business to intrude on the man's life. There are going to be quite a few people coming tonight. I'm told it's going to be the busiest night we've had in a month, so I just thought I should put a bit more effort into my appearance. Well in that case I wish you luck tonight, Miya said with a smile. Thanks, I have a feeling I might need some luck. Kagari smirked. He turned around and was about to close the door before looking over his shoulder. I have a feeling I might not be back tonight, so don't worry if you don't see me tomorrow morning. As the door closed behind Kagari and the sounds of footsteps began receding deeper into the hall, Musubi turned to Naruto with a question on her mind. Hey, Naruto-sama. What was all that about? Just an adult conversation, Musubi-chan. Nothing for you to worry about right for now. Naruto sighed and withheld the urge to palm his face as Miya began giggling behind her hand. Honestly, he was beginning to seriously question Musubi's naivety. There had to be a limit on just how naive and unknowledgeable a person can be. None of the other Sakurai he had met were so naive about the world. Oh, okay. The girl seemed to accept his answer with the same ease she always did, and went back to her eating, polishing off what Naruto recognized as her 13th bowl of rice. Sometime during the conversations taking place, Kusano had finished eating. The little girl, after scarfing down nearly 3 times her weight in food, completely ignored the other people as they spoke. Blinking, her eyes began to take on a drowsy quality, dripping and closing occasionally as she fought to stay awake. However, with all that had happened to her, the attack on her person as someone tried to force her into being their Sakurai via force winging, creating the abnormal plant growth in the Arboretum, spending who knew how long inside of that place all alone, and with no one to comfort her, and finally, the action that had accumulated her adventure before coming into the care of Uzumaki Naruto, had left her spent. Her eyes dripped even further down before she slumped over, her head hitting the table as her eyes closed a final time and sleep took her. I think the little dear's all tuckered out, Mia said as she noticed the young girl had fallen asleep. She placed her hands against her cheeks, smiling at how cute the young Sakurai looked. She was snoring contently, eyes closed and mouth partially open with several grains of rice covering her cheeks. The spoon she had been using to eat with was still clutched tightly in her hand, only moving with each breath she let out. Now that her stomach is full, she's probably exhausted. Right, in that case we should get her to bed, Naruto commented. He lifted the little girl into his arms. It was rather easy considering how light she was, like a feather. Yes, we should. Mii stood up as well, and after a few minutes both Akitsu and Musubi got to their feet too. And since your room is rather crowded, she can sleep with me. I've already laid out the bed sheets for her. Eh? Are you sure? Asked Naruto. I don't want to impose on you or anything. You won't be imposing on me, Mii replied easily. We can't have her sleep in her own room, and you've already got 3 people living in your bedroom. She gave the blonde a pointed look, causing him to laugh sheepishly. So don't worry about it, okay? If you insist, then I won't say no. Naruto bowed to the purple-haired beauty as much as possible with Kusano in his arms. You have my thanks for this. I really appreciate all you're doing for us. You're very welcome, Mii replied, a dazzling smile. Now come on, let's get her in bed. And you 3 should probably turn in as well. Yes, ma'am. Kagari couldn't help but sigh in relief as he left Mazen Izumo. The cool night air seemed to soothe his inflamed body, something he was very grateful for. It was getting harder and harder to be in the presence of that man, a fact which bothered him greatly. He didn't hate Naruto, he didn't necessarily like Naruto either, but that was more on account of barely knowing him. After tonight, however, if nothing else, he could honestly say that the blonde was a good man. That he could barely stand to be in the Wanderer's presence was troubling, especially since they lived together. As these thoughts passed through his mind, he walked down one of the many streets near the boarding house he lived at, his long coat billowing slightly as he moved. It was dark out, with only the streetlights to illuminate his path. It wasn't long before he reached his destination, a very expensive-looking limousine that was parked by curb with only a single light on in the back, as if it was waiting for someone. Walking over to it, Kagari stopped by the rear door that was facing the road. Opening it, he leaned down and peered in to see the person who had called him, who also happened to be the woman helping him with his job as the guardian of unwinged Sakurais. The limousine, huh? This is a pretty classy way to greet a friend, he smirked at the woman, sitting with her right leg crossed over the left, a cigarette in her left hand. She was a slender woman with gray hair and gray eyes. There was a long scar that traveled across her left eye, which was being covered by a large triangular eye patch. Currently, she was wearing an expensive purple dress. It was sleeveless with a thin neckline that acted as a choker, and was connected with the rest of the dress, forming an X pattern as it moved across her chest, and left a large rhombus-like hole to show off her cleavage. The woman's name was Sahashi Takami, and she was the person who had asked him to become the guardian of unwinged Sakurai. It's the least I could do, Takami replied with a smile. You've missed a lot of work lately because of me. As Kagari stepped into the car and sat down, her gaze sharpened. Do you think number 180 is safe with that man? Safer than she would be with anyone else, was the reply she got. Takami frowned, taking a drag of her cigarette before blowing out a stream of smoke. You seem to have faith in this man. She looked back at her companion for the moment with a raised eyebrow and undisguised curiosity. I thought you said you didn't trust him. I said I don't know him, Kagari corrected. The first time I met him was when he had winged Sakurai number 88, Musubi. I saw him doing things, acts of superhuman speed that shouldn't be possible for a human to do. Yet I also know he is human. A Sakurai cannot be an Ashikabi, so that makes it the only viable explanation. This also leaves me baffled and unable to come up with any theory on just how he is capable of such a feat. I don't like unknown variables. He never did, Takami agreed with a nod. Truth was, she didn't like it either. The man was a ghost. He had appeared out of nowhere with no past, no history, no worker's ID, nothing. Even his passports were unavailable, either missing or purposely stricken from the records. She didn't know, but that she couldn't find out anything about this man was disturbing. MBI was one of the largest companies in the world, and their technology was the most advanced. They had satellites in station to watch every country and had hacked into the satellites of other countries. Their information network, while more focused on Japan and Shinto Tito in general, was still impressive on an international scale. With the level of technology they possessed, along with their information network, finding information on one person should be easy. Which is why not being able to learn anything about Uzumaki Naruto bothered her so much. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a small mobile phone, a touchscreen, much like the one Naruto used, only this one MBI logo was on the back. Accessing some of the files she kept on hand, Takami scrolled down until she located a file that was simply called UN. Tapping on the file with her thumb, she opened it, bringing out a picture of the man they were talking about, and any relevant information they had gained on him. Uzumaki Naruto, age 18, height 195 centimeters, weight 91 kilograms, build lean, athletic, hair color blonde, eye color blue, Sakure's winged. Number 88, Musubi, number 7, Akitsu, and now he has Sakure number 108, Kusano under his care. Though he hasn't winged her yet, Kagari pointed out. I suspect that he won't wing her unless she's the one who decides she wants to be winged by him, even though she did react to him. Is that so? Said Takami, shifting her body around to face him as a look of interest appeared on her features. This night when I was trying to keep people away from number 108, I ran into Naruto and his Sakure, he admitted. Takami raised an eyebrow in interest. I almost roasted him with a fireball, but he and his Sakure managed to dodge. We probably would have stayed in a stalemate had it not been for Mikagami's Sakure blowing up the front gate to go after Kusano. He paused to let Takami absorb the information he had given her. Go on, the woman prodded. We ended up teaming up after that. 88 and 7 stayed behind when we were ambushed by 3 of Mikagami's Sakure, while Naruto and I went into the Arboretum. Well there, he told me that he had known about Kusano being hidden inside of the forest before Minako had sent his message. Apparently he'd had a dream about her beforehand and had already planned on rescuing her. The message just sped up his plans. I see. That was a very unusual but not unexpected way for a Sakure to reach out to their Ashikabi. When a Sakure could feel who their Ashikabi was, but was incapable of, or perhaps didn't want to reach out to the person they were destined to be with. Their desire to be winged would often manifest itself in dreams, along with the usual heat they felt when in the presence of their Ashikabi. Pulling her thoughts back to the present, Takami asked the question she had been dying to ask, since Kagari had entered the car. What do you know about Uzumaki Naruto? Not much, Kagari admitted. Seeing the look of disbelief the woman gave him caused the young man to hold up his hands, as if to defend himself from her assault. He's a very reclusive person. Once again he was given that "are you fucking kidding me" look that Takami had perfected. It was a look she had perfected thanks to her dealings with that fool, Hiroto Minaka. Maybe not reclusive so much as quiet about his past. Aside from a few stories about his travels, which really don't tell us much at all, except that he traveled a lot before coming to Japan, I know almost nothing of his past. Who he is, where he comes from, what he did before coming here. Whenever the subject comes up he somehow manages to dodge the question, answering it without really answering it. So what you're saying is you know next to nothing about him? Takami sighed. That was disappointing. This new player to the game had caught a lot of attention when he winged the broken Sakure, and not just from her and MBI. A lot of other Shikabus had found out about this miracle winging, as well as a lot of Sakures. It wouldn't surprise her if the man soon found himself on the receiving end of a lot of unwanted attention. Or wanted attention, depending on the kind of man he was, and whether he ended up dealing with an Ashikabi or an unwinged Sakure. Well, Kagari grimaced as his hand came up to rub his chest. Takami watched the action with worry, but he ignored the look in favor of continuing. I do know one thing about him that you may find interesting. Takami leaned forward as if trying to keep their conversation from being overheard, even though they were the only 2 people in the car. What do you know? She asked eagerly, hoping to receive any scrap of knowledge she could on the elusive blonde. When Naruto and I went into the Arboretum, we were attacked by Hikari and Hibiki, along with their Ashikabi, Seo, Kagari began slowly. He got into a bit of an argument with them. Seo seemed to think Naruto was there to forcibly wing her like everyone else, and didn't seem to want to let him go any further. I had decided to help him, since both Hikari and Hibiki know I would never let an unwinged Sakure be winged by someone who wasn't their Ashikabi. I thought my presence would help settle the trust issue. Takami nodded along with his words. She knew Seo was, as well as the 2 Sakure he had winged. She also knew that Kagari had a history with them due to the pair, making several attempts to defeat unwinged Sakure, before they found their Shikabus. Sometime after I revealed myself, something happened to Naruto. Kagari trailed off a moment later, an unsure look crossing his face. After several seconds of silence, Takami couldn't keep in her anticipation anymore. What happened? I don't know, he admitted. His entire body just froze up, and he had this look of horror on his face that I've never seen before. A shudder went through his spine as he remembered just how frightened Naruto had looked at that point. Even though all Kagari had been able to see were the blonde's eyes, those orbs had been more expressive than 1,000 facial expressions could have hoped to be. The next thing I knew, Naruto was moving, and when I say moving, I mean moving. The man had been going so fast that I couldn't even track him. Wait, what do you mean you couldn't track him? Asked Takami, interrupting the man's story so he could give her a more accurate description of his words. I mean just what I said, Kagari told her. One moment, Naruto was standing there, stiff as a board, and the next he was just gone. He had moved so fast that the ground underneath him had exploded. "You're kidding," she said, not for a second believing that a human could move as fast as Naruto had. "You have to be kidding." She got a good look at Kagari's face after speaking, and paled. "Shit, you're not kidding." "No," Kagari stated dryly. "I'm not." He shook his head. "Though I really wish I was, and what happens next will shock you even more." Takami was almost afraid to ask, but did so anyways. "So what happened next?" "After Naruto took off, we followed him," Kagari began his story again. "Honestly, it wasn't that hard. While Naruto himself had pretty much disappeared, he left several destroyed tree branches in his wake. Each fallen branch looked like someone strapped a small stick of dynamite to it, only enough so that it would create a condensed explosion of a few inches, and blew the branches off the trees. He had never seen anything like it. Well, we arrived in a clearing about 10 minutes later. Naruto was already there, and number 108 was clinging to him while she slept." "So what? He moved really fast and saved Kusano?" Asked Takami, hoping that wasn't all of the information the fire user had. If it was, then she would be disappointed. "No," Kagari grimaced, knowing what he said next would shock the woman speechless. He took a deep breath, then plunged on. "When we got there was another person who had also come to get Kusano. Number 43, Yomi," Takami stated with a nod. "I know that, I was with the team who had been dispatched to pick her up." She trailed off a moment later, blinking. Kagari waited for the woman to connect the dots. It didn't take too long. Takami was a smart woman, and it was easy to see when she figured out where he had been going with his story when her eyes widened. "Impossible," she said, her voice shocked as she shook her head. "What you're suggesting is impossible." "Obviously it's not," Kagari stated in a dry tone, though even as he spoke he knew that a part of him still didn't believe. "There was no one else in that clearing aside from number 108, and I know for a fact that Yomi was the only other Ashikabi besides her, myself, Hikari, and Hibiki who had been there. All evidence points towards the fact that Uzumaki Naruto managed to beat Isekure on his own." "What you're saying is impossible," she stated again, and it sounded more like denial than anything else. "There's just no way that a human could possibly defeat Isekure." "Takami, I understand that you don't want to believe this," Kagari started, and he really did understand. A human defeating Isekure. The very notion was absurd. Well, Kagari didn't look down on humans, especially considering his Ashikabi, if he ever got one, would be a human. The fact remained that Sekure were more powerful than humans. They were faster, stronger, and many had powerful abilities that most humans would expect to read in a shonen manga. He didn't want to believe that a human could fight a Sekure and win, but what else could he do in this instance? "No?" Takami snapped, the denial and anger in her voice surprising Kagari. "You don't understand, Hamura," she shouted, using his real name instead of his alias. "What?" Kagari blinked as Takami once more began pressing buttons on her phone, this time at a much more furious pace. "What don't I understand?" "This." Takami thrust the phone into Kagari's face. The fire user had to lean back, lest the tiny device smack him in the nose. Tentatively, he took the phone from the angry and slightly hysterical woman's hand, to pull it away from his face, so he could read it without going cross-eyed. As he began reading the text, which Kagari noted was a list, his eyes began to widen. Broken nose. Severe concussion. Suffering from a severe case of whiplash from the first cervical to the fifth. Severe damage done to all major muscle groups in the arms, legs, back, and core. Rotator cuff in right arm appears to have been cut by a sharp implement. Comminuted fractures in the clavicle, scapula, and radius bones of the right arm. Comminuted fractures of the clavicle, scapula, and humerus bones of the left arm. Comminuted fracture of the femur and tibia in the left leg, and the tibia and fibula of the right leg. Turning his head to gape at Takami, Kagari asked, "What is this?" That, Takami grimaced, is the reason why Naruto could not have possibly defeated number 43. Shit, Kagari swore. "You don't mean?" "It was a level 4 deactivation," Takami said with a grimace. Kagari seemed to mimic her actions as they both fell silent, each one contemplating the new information they had been given. Now that the moment of shock had passed, Takami had calmed down enough to at least think about the knowledge that Kagari had given her about Naruto, even if she still didn't like it. Deciding to focus on the matter from an objective standpoint, Takami went over all of the information that she had just been given in relation to Yumi's defeat. Firstly, the Lightning Twins, Yomi, and Kagari himself had been the only Sekure within the Arboretum at the time. The only other two people there had been Seo and Naruto. She only had Kagari's word to go on, but she trusted him enough to believe him out of hand, until she could check the MBI databanks on last night's debacle. God, was it already morning? It would be easy enough for her to find out if there were any other Sekirei in that area. If it turned out that Kagari had been correct, and Naruto really was the only person there at the time of Yomi's demise, aside from Kusano of course, then she would have no choice but to believe that the fire user was telling the truth. She didn't like this, however. The knowledge that there was a human out there who had the ability to fight a Sekirei and emerge victorious went against everything she had been researching up to this point. Not only did it practically spit in the face of her research, it meant they now had a dangerous man running loose who could potentially kill Sekirei. That he was an Ashikabi just made it worse. If what Kagari said was true and Uzumaki Naruto had accomplished that feat, then there was far more to the blonde male than she, and possibly even Minaka, realized. If only she knew. Thinking of Minaka, Takami couldn't help but question whether he knew of this or not. Was Minaka aware that they had a human with Sekirei fighting capabilities in Japan? And that he had winged 2 Sekirei, with a possible third on the way, within a grand total of several days. Not to mention that one of those Sekireis should have been impossible to wing at all. She wished she had the answers to those questions, and even thought about seeing if she could beat them out of the man. However, even she knew that doing so would be impossible. Minaka was surprisingly tight-lipped, especially when she considered how damn loud and obnoxious he was about things he wanted to keep a secret. She sighed and took another drag of her cigarette, letting the nicotine calm her nerves of the shock she felt from this new piece of information. After blowing out several streams of smoke, she felt infinitely better, and turned her head to look at Kagari once again. Do you know how he managed to defeat number 43? She asked quietly, almost as if afraid that by asking she was admitting defeat. No, Kagari shook his head as he pulled out his own, stuck it in his mouth. Holding his hand out in the shape of a gun, his index finger ignited so he could light his death stick. He took a long drag from it, hoping that the nicotine would help him calm down. By the time we had arrived there, the battle was already over. He would have mentioned the state of the battle site, but considering she had been there to pick up Yomi, he was sure she had already seen the amount of destruction the fight had caused. I see, Takami sounded disappointed as she closed her eyes and took another drag of her cigarette. She was quiet for a moment, lost contemplating everything she now knew. Eventually, however, she opened her eyes again and asked what would probably be one of the last questions she had for Kagari. What else do you know about him? Kagari crossed his arms and closed his eyes as he pondered the question. After a few seconds he nodded and began telling Takami everything he knew about Uzumaki Naruto. Aside from the fact he can apparently beat a Sekirei in combat, he also seems to have the strange ability to earn the trust of others. Already knowing that Takami would ask for an explanation, he began elaborating. It only took a single meeting with him before Samamiya decided she could trust him. During the few times I've seen them together, they look very comfortable in each other's presence. Very comfortable. That was another thing that bothered Kagari. Mia was a very kind woman when she wasn't being scary. However, that didn't mean she trusted people out of hand, and certainly not within the first hour of meeting them. Yet in their first meeting, Naruto had somehow gained the woman's trust. I see the ability to change fate. That was what she had told him when he had asked her if she thought letting Naruto stay with them was a good idea. Kagari had no clue what the woman meant by changing fate, but he himself was beginning to understand that there was more to that man than he had ever thought possible. Naruto had, after all, defeated a Sekirei. Lovers? No, Kagari snorted incredulously at Takami's question. You and I both know that Mia was in love with Takedo. She would never fall in love with another man so easily. Or at all. However, they're both very friendly with each other, and often joke around and converse with each other, when neither of them are spending time with the others. Several times I've seen the two of them just sitting around sharing a cup of tea, and Mia has even taken to training Sekirei number 88. She wouldn't do that unless she liked both the Sekirei and her Ashikabi, Takami agreed. While she would admit to not knowing Mia that well, she knew enough about the purple-haired beauty to know that much at least. Kagari nodded before continuing with his report. He also has a very strong rapport with his Sekirei. Both Akitsu and Usupi are fiercely loyal to him. Naruto seems to be the type of person who treats his bond with them as if he were in a relationship with them. Oh? Takami raised a single, manicured eyebrow. This was an interesting piece of information. You mean he treats them like they were his lovers? Or his girlfriends, Kagari said with a shrug. So far Naruto has taken Usupi out shopping for clothes, and they have also gone out on a picnic. I know that he and Akitsu haven't done as much yet, but I'm pretty sure the reason is more due to the fact that he only winged her 2 days ago. However, he did take her shopping for clothes before this whole fiasco with number 108 started. Along with that, he seems to be affectionate towards them. It's not unusual to see him with one or both of them, usually in some form of physical contact. Kagari trailed off as he tried to think of other pieces of information he had learned that may be relevant. While he was doing that, Takami had already decided what else she wanted to know. What about his personality? His personality? Kagari blinked. When Takami nodded, he said, friendly. I thought you said he was reclusive, Takami countered with a sly smile, making Kagari scowl slightly. I said he was quiet about his past. He refuses to reveal anything about his origins, however, aside from that he seems to be a very friendly and outgoing person. In some ways he reminds me of number 88, outgoing, talkative, yet unlike her, he also seems to be highly intelligent and observative, though he can also be very quiet at times. Sometimes I've noticed he'll trail of mid-sentence and gets this odd look. Kagari paused and shook his head. It's like he's thinking of something painful when he looks like that. He also has a tendency to switch personalities. Sometimes he acts just like 88, other times he's very quiet, and still sometimes he acts in a manner similar to Mia. It's like he has multiple personalities or something. He trailed off for a moment, then sighed. There was so much about Naruto that he simply didn't know, and the little bit that he did know only left more questions. How had Naruto been able to move so fast during the incident at the Arboretum, and before when he had been running with Musubi in his arms while being chased by the Lightning Twins? How had he been able to defeat a Sekirei in combat? It was Uzumaki Naruto. So in short, aside from learning that he has a friendly personality, but refuses to let people know about his past, can apparently outpace a Sekirei, and has apparently defeated a Sekirei, we know next to nothing about him, Takami said in a clinical tone that held a hint of sarcasm. It was clear that she was back in form now that the shock factor Kagari had hit her with had worn off. Pretty much, Kagari agreed with a nod of his head, and Takami snorted, though whether from incredulity at this entire situation or some other reason, was unknown to anyone but Takami. Do you trust him? She asked suddenly, the question making the fire user blink in surprise. Kagari paused. Did he trust Naruto? He would admit the blonde seemed to be a good guy. Friendly, protective and confident. Charismatic. A natural leader in many aspects. Even Mia had taken a liking to him for some reason he couldn't fathom. However, not completely, Kagari said at last. I trust that he is a good person, and I don't think we'll have anything to worry about as far as him becoming like Minaka or the two Ashikabi that have been known for forcibly winged Sekireis. But until I know more about him, I simply can't trust him. There were simply too many unknown variables surrounding Naruto for him to trust a man. Without knowing about his past, without knowing how he had been able to accomplish those feats he had seen last night, Kagari simply couldn't trust Naruto. I see. Takami sighed. There were a few moments of silence between the pair, neither willing to break it at the moment as they both got lost in thought. It would be Kagari who broke the silence. So what are we going to do tonight? Takami smirked as she pulled out one of the MBI executive credit cards. I swiped Minaka's card from him a little while ago. I get the feeling he was the one who released Sekirei number 7. So I think we should punish the bastard by using his card to buy anything and everything we want tonight. Within his tower, Hiroto Minaka sneezed violently, before he went back to the screen where he was watching Izumo in to see if his newest obsession, the Sekirei Plan's news player was doing anything entertaining. Kagari let out a short laugh. Takami, this is why I like you so much. Yes, it was a good night to be them. And a poor one to be Minaka. Naruto looked up at the sky as he sat on the back porch by himself, hands placed behind him to act as support as he leaned back. His feet were planting on the soft ground below the house. The small lip that acted as the porch wasn't very high, maybe a foot or so, possibly less. He was alone at the moment. Both Akitsu and Musubi were in the bath, and Mia was in the kitchen washing dishes. Naruto had offered to help, but she had turned him down, stating that he'd had a long day and should get some rest. Kusano was already asleep, as far as he knew. It was a beautiful night, or early morning. The sky had darkened to a very dark, almost blackish blue color. Several thousand stars were twinkling in the night sky, thousands of light years from the earth. He could recognize all of the constellations in the sky, and was easily pointing them out to himself, using his skills in observation and his imaginative mind to connect the stars together, and create the images the constellations represent. It was a skill he had acquired during one of the times he had decided to pose as a college student, and took several astronomy courses. He wondered how his old friends would react if they learned he had been to school not just once, but several hundred times in the past 1,000 or so years. Of course, his going to college had been a necessity. The change of the times meant that Naruto needed to learn as much about the world and people in it as possible, so that he could adapt to any situation. Most of the courses he had taken while in college had been ones that would help him in some way, learning the various languages of the world, studying business, so that he could make a living as an author, and not get cheated out of a deal. Studying politics so he could work behind the scenes to keep his existence a secret, learning to use the news technologies and the internet, so that he could understand the process that went into entering data on the World Wide Web, and ensuring that whoever he had erasing information about him that might spring up and inputting new information of his own desire was doing their job properly. Many of the courses he had taken were all designed to help him blend into society and cover the secret of his existence. Of course, even though it had been necessary, he was sure his friends would have still shit a brick if they could see him now. He would have chuckled at the thought, but just thinking about his long-gone friends hurt. So much had changed since the Elemental Nations disbanded, though that was perhaps too soft of a word for what happened. Both the land itself, from the shifting of the tectonic plates that had separated what had at one point been more or less one large land mass with several smaller continents that had not been a part of the elemental nations, to the cultural changes, the great variety of artwork and architecture that had sprung up from the many different countries that came into being, to the changes in its people, the advancements that had been made through history and the technological wonders they had come up with when chakra had become a thing of the past. Even he had changed. Well, not much had changed on the outside. In fact, nothing had changed at all when it came to the blonde's physical appearance. He looked the same now as he had when he had gained this accursed power. No, his changes were more along the lines of mental and spiritual change. Aside from becoming much quieter than he used to be, he was also much more patient, more capable, more intelligent, and much more bitter with the world. Though it may be more accurate to say he was embittered with his inability to pass on, to leave the mortal plane, so he could be with his loved ones again, his precious people. Many a night he had wished for the end, to feel the cold embrace of death, as his soul left his flesh and blood body, so he could ascend to where his parents and adopted family was waiting for him. Anyone else may have been disturbed by those thoughts, but Naruto had lived a long life, and with everyone he had ever known and loved gone, the blonde had simply desired to go where they were. They were the thoughts of a man who had lived for a long time, and now had nothing left to live for. Of course, I do have people to live for now, he thought to himself. His mind conjured the images of the people he had come to care about: Akitsu, Musubi, Miya, Uzume, Kagari and Aokusano. They were people who had become important to him, precious. It was odd to feel that desire again, the desire to be with and protect others. He had spent so much time ignoring humanity to the best of his ability that he was unsure what to do about these new feelings. Or perhaps it would be accurate to say all of the old feelings that had been re-emerging. It had started out when he had rescued Musubi, and grown after he had winged her. The bond. Naruto was sure the bond was the cause of his re-emerging emotions. Ever since he had winged Musubi, he had been feeling her emotions, like static in the back of his mind. They weren't always very clear, sometimes the emotions themselves were muddled, and he was unable to make heads or tails of what she was feeling. The inclusion of Akitsu had added to his inability to properly read the excitable girl's emotions. If it had been difficult dealing with Musubi, then having to feel both Akitsu and Musubi through this strange bond was insane. However, while he could not feel their emotions as clearly as his own, he felt enough. More than enough. It had become very difficult to retain his generally uncaring state of mind. Being able to feel his Sakurai's emotions seemed to pulling his own emotions from the murky depths he had hidden them. It was like this one movie he had seen once, where two people had ended up switching bodies to see how the other lived and gained an appreciation of what they had. Only in Naruto's case he was feeling the emotions of his Sakurai, and the emotional feedback was bringing all of his own emotions back, leaving him off balance and unable to react properly. A part of him wanted to break this bond. To shatter it so that he wouldn't have to feel this way. They would only hurt him in the end, he knew. Eventually, Akitsu and Musubi would die, and he would be left alone. If he let them into his heart, it would only lead to his heart breaking. And Naruto did not know how much more of that he could take before he became what the people of Konoha had once thought him to be, a monster. There was a distinct irony to his thoughts, one that Naruto recognized. He could remember, oh so clearly, the day he had tried to stop Sasuke from betraying Konoha to go to Orochimaru. His at the time wayward rival and brother in all but blood had been determined to break his bonds with Naruto and the people of Konoha, in much the same way Naruto contemplated doing right now. It was a bitter reminder of just how low he had fallen since those days. And yet, in spite of the fact that Naruto knew he should break this bond, knew it would only lead to a bittersweet end, even if he could, the blonde was unsure he wanted to. These emotions he had been experiencing since bonding to his first Sakurai, which had only increased after bonding to his second Sakurai, he liked them. They felt nice. These feelings, these emotions, this desire to protect and cherish the woman he now found himself connected to, they felt natural. Yes, natural. Like this was how he was supposed to feel, and was only just now realizing it. However, that in itself was a problem, when he was currently unsure how to deal with. With a heavy sigh, Naruto shifted his attention elsewhere. He couldn't do anything about his conflicting feelings right now, he was unsure of where to even begin to address that issue. Instead he focused on something else, something that he could deal with. Analyzing his battle with number 43, Yomi. The battle, if it could truly be called that, had only lasted 2 minutes. Yomi, for all her ability and power, had been no match for him. Yes, she had been faster than any human in this day and age, faster even than quite a few of the ninja he had known in the past. But then again, so was he. Sure, she had been strong, the fact that she had withstood the brunt of his assault for so long without her arms breaking, had been impressive. But his chakra-enhanced body was still stronger. And yes, she did have a very unique ability, a powerful attack that could truly be devastating if used correctly. But she had been inexperienced in its use. It was clear to him that the girl had no formal training in the use of her power, or fighting in general. He was actually somewhat surprised. He would have thought that the scientists of MBI would have taught her about her powers. After all, if you're going to make some kind of human weapon, shouldn't you know how the weapon you are making works? That power Yomi had used, the wind blade, it had been quite impressive. Naruto had only needed for her to use it against him a single time, before he had properly analyzed the ability. The attack itself was reminiscent of the wind release. Vacuum Sphere, which had been one of the jutsu favored by Danzo. The Shinkajuku was not a normal wind attack, as its name states, the jutsu created a vacuum in the form of a sphere. It was a small space of nothing, a tiny sphere in which nothing could exist, not even air. That was what made the attack so deadly. With nothing able to exist, anything that it came into contact with ceased to exist as well. With the Shinkajuku, that attack had been in the form of a sphere, and therefore the jutsu possessed a piercing power greater than even Kakashi's Hurikiri. A powerful jutsu indeed. Yumi's attack had been more along the lines of a blade, or perhaps a crescent wave would be a more accurate description. Still, despite its different shape, the concept behind her attack was the same as the Shinkajuku. If number 43 had truly learned how to harness and use that ability before they had battled, it would have taken him much longer to actually defeat her, though she still would have lost in the end. Yet in spite of the fact that he had been better than Yomi, as well as more physically capable, not everything had turned out as perfectly as it had seemed. It had only been after the adrenaline had worn off from the battle that Naruto realized of the damage he himself had received, not the wound Yomi had given him, but the damage he had done to himself. It had been after he had been joined by Kagari, Seo, and the lightning twins that Naruto had felt it, the pain from having his muscles shredded by his own power. The muscles in his arms that he had been enhancing with his chakra had been ripped apart, the muscles in his calf and thighs had been shredded to pieces. Naruto couldn't see them, but if he had, he was sure they would have looked like someone had put them in a blender. As it was, only Naruto's ungodly tolerance for pain kept him from screaming like a little girl. A very manly little girl, that is. It was a good thing that his chakra, the very same chakra that had done so much damage to his body, had already healed them by the time he had been aware enough of his own injuries to feel them. He was grateful for that at least. Naruto knew he would need to be more careful in the future. Well, just like losing a limb, this kind of damage wouldn't be in any way debilitating. He could ill afford to let himself get injured enough that he might slip up when his reaction time really counted. Another thing that was bothering him was just how tired he was. Much like the pain had been kept at bay only by the adrenaline in his body, so too had his exhaustion. Even now, as his inhuman chakra circulated through his body, replenishing the energy he had lost, he felt tired. His muscles had the ache that came from overuse, his body felt like it wanted to shut down, and despite the fact that he was too preoccupied to go to sleep, that was exactly what he wanted to do at this moment. The fight had not been that long, but Naruto felt as if he had been battling for days on end without pause. This must be what happens when someone stops training themselves for several thousand years, and then gets into a fight with a being who has superhuman powers. One might think that in the thousands of years he had been alive, Naruto would have become even more powerful than ever. After all, he had thousands of years to train and improve, right? The truth, however, was that Naruto hadn't trained in a long time. It was only thanks to his chakra that the blonde's body had not atrophied. Perhaps it was time to start training himself again, he thought. If he was really going to be stuck in this Sekirei plan, then it would definitely be a good idea to get into shape. He would need to think up a training regime for that, and he would need to find a place where he could train away from prying eyes. It wouldn't do to let anybody, even his Sekirei, see what kind of training he did. Especially Musubi, that girl had already proven she couldn't keep a secret to save her life. Oni-chan. Hearing the soft feminine voice, Naruto was brought from his thoughts and turned his head to see Kusano standing just a few feet from him. He wondered when she had woken up, but didn't let this stop him from giving her a smile. Good evening, Ku-chan. Well, he supposed it was morning now, but the sun had yet to rise, so evening would do for now. Kusano blushed, looking down at her feet in mild embarrassment. Though what she was embarrassed about Naruto did not know. Good evening. Why don't you sit down? The blonde suggested, patting the spot right next to him. Kusano looked at him for a moment, thinking. After a few seconds she walked over to him with small, hurried footsteps. She sat down next to him, close enough that should she wish to, she could grab onto him, but far enough that they weren't touching. Naruto smiled before grabbing onto the small blanket he had brought with him. It wasn't cold enough for him to use it, bringing it more out of instinct than anything else. But from the way Kusano was shivering, he figured it was a good thing he had brought out. Maybe he was psychic. He wrapped the blanket around the girl, smiling when her large green eyes looked at him. It was a tired smile, resigned as well, but it was also genuine. One of the few real smiles Naruto had given in thousands of years. He had been giving those a bit more often lately. Real smiles, that is. Are you feeling better now that you've eaten and got a good night's rest? He asked, letting some concern for the girl leak into his voice. Naruto would have gone into a psychoanalysis about his feelings for the girl, and why it would be better if he pushed her away, but he was beginning to get used to having his emotions all over the board by now. Maybe he was just beginning to accept the inevitable. Yes, Kusano replied in her tiny voice. Naruto was beginning to think she was just a soft-spoken girl. The small Sakurai's voice was very soft, light, like a whisper on the wind. It also told him much about her personality, that of a little girl who was soft-spoken and didn't like violence. Of course, she was a little girl, so not liking violence was to be expected of her. I'm glad you went through a rough time, Naruto said. He quieted a moment later, his head turning as he looked at the backyard. His eyes landed on this solitary tree. You know, that tree over there is where I first saw you. It hasn't even been 2 days since then. Kusano was quiet for a moment, her head tilted down slightly as her eyes looked from Naruto to the ground several times. Eventually, however, she did speak. The tree, it felt Oni-chan, she told him. When he touched it. And when it did, Ku-chan felt Oni-chan through the tree. It told Ku-chan that Oni-chan was one with it, and it was one with Oni-chan. Naruto absently nodded, coming to the conclusion that Kusano had somehow sensed his connection with nature through the tree. That was a very handy skill, a powerful skill if used properly, and one that would make Senju Hashirama jealous. Though that all depended on whether or not she could feel others through the trees as well. It could just be him due to his ability to harness nature chakra. Still, even if she could only commune with the trees, that would be a valuable asset to have. Oni-chan. Naruto turned his head, and blinked in surprise when he found a pair of forest green eyes inches from his own. A pair of tiny hands grabbed onto his face, cupping his cheeks. Oni-chan, will you? Kusano paused, her eyes darting like a scared animal. Then she took a deep breath and plunged on. Will Oni-chan be Ku-chan's Ashikabi? Naruto didn't get a chance to respond, whether to accept or decline, because the moment Kusano finished speaking her face closed the distance between his own face. Lips pressed themselves against his own and the blonde's mind short-circuited. He was kissing a 9-year-old. It was a disturbing thought, granted, just about everyone was a child when compared to someone as ageless as him. That still didn't change the fact that a child was kissing him. Despite this, he didn't jerk away from the action, however, he also didn't kiss back. Naruto didn't want to be an ass and break the child's heart, yet at the same time he really wasn't all that comfortable being in this position. He was no lollican. Still, as his mind began coming back into focus, he realized this was probably also for the best. There were other people who would try to force her into a winging, essentially making the girl their slave. If nothing else, the least he could do was let her choose whether or not she should be winged by him. The Sakurai crest on her back began to glow as she drank in his chakra, illuminating the surrounding area in its radiance. Wings spread out from her back, glowing a bright and lively green, with each feather taking on the shape of large tree leaves, arranged in the shape of angel wings. And much like what had happened when he winged both Akitsu and Usubi, Naruto felt the stirring of a presence within his mind. He could feel Kusano within him, he felt safe, secure, and happy in the knowledge that he had finally found his Oni-chan. And just like with Musubi and Akitsu, he knew that these feelings, these emotions, were not his own. With the release of her power via her winging, the backyard began to grow with new life. Dozens of flowers, beautiful colorful flowers of several different varieties sprouting from the ground. A brilliant array of golds, oranges and purples, plants that grew from small stalks to full-grown flowers in seconds, their petals bursting open and showing off their beauty. It was a magnificent sight, one that Naruto, someone who had a surprisingly green thumb, could not help but admire. Moments later, the wings behind Kusano's back disappeared as if they had never been there, leaving only the numerous blooming flowers to signify their passing. Inside her kitchen, Asamiya held up a small plant that had grown off of her sponge, with a look of mild confusion. Behind the Ashikabi and his new Sakurai, Akitsu and Usubi, having just come to get the blonde after they finished preparing the bed, admired the scene with them. The two fully grown Sakurais stared in awe at the beautiful display of flowers. Neither of them had seen anything like it in their entire lives. Naruto looked away from the beautiful display of flora, towards the young girl his power created them. She was looking at him, her eyes displaying a surprising depth of emotions. Then she smiled, and Naruto felt a smile of his own appear unbidden on his face. Awkward or not, he couldn't really find it in himself to complain about his new Sakurai being a kid. She had reacted to him and he had rescued her, Kusano belonged with them. And that was all that mattered. He just hoped they wouldn't have to kiss again until she was older. Much older. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below, and turn on the bell notification. And also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.